And we're back, and it's time now for The Clash. We're 12 to 15-year-olds, as we spoke about earlier, about to get the final say on COVID vaccines, according to Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, said that while consent will be sought from parents, in cases where a child is deemed competent enough, their decision will prevail. With Chris Whitty and the UK's 3 other chief medical officers expected to rule on the rollout within days, can we expect our young people to make a reasoned decision on jabs, even given the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation is undecided about the risks versus the rewards? So to debate this evening, we have Dr. Anthony Hilton, a consultant surgeon with 30 years of experience in the NHS. Dr. David Strain is here too, co-chair of BMA Medical Academics. So too, John Jolly, the chief executive of Parental, and the broadcaster Beverly Turner. Beverly, you have huge concerns about this, don't you?
Of course, I can't even believe we're actually debating it, Dan. When I hear an opening like that, should a 12-year-old have a decision-making process which excludes the parents in relation to an illness which they are at statistically zero risk of dying from as a healthy child? I still have to sort of pinch myself that we're even having this conversation. At the moment, children cannot receive Calpol or sunscreen from a teacher without a parent's say so. So I, along with millions of other parents, feel both scared for our children because no drug is risk-free, and we are absolutely furious with the government that they are taking this decision out of our hands. I said to my 12-year-old at dinner tonight, Kiki, what do you know about myocarditis? And she said, who's that? And if we're asking children to make a decision on a medical procedure, they have to understand in such enormous detail the risks and the benefits. And as you said, the JCVI themselves have advised the government that they do not see any reason at this time to give this jab to 12 to 15-year-olds. So if the government's own advisors are not recommending it, then how dare the government go beyond that and make the decision not only without our consent as parents, but also the unprecedented move of making this decision without the JCVI's say so. It makes no sense, Dan, and children of this age will have all of the risks of these vaccines in the short and who knows what the long term, and they will have none of the benefits that the elderly, the vulnerable, the overweight, the already ill, those with comorbidities benefit from in terms of these jabs. So my position on this is incredibly clear, and I would urge all parents to know that you can say no and you can be strong and you can communicate with your child's school to tell them that this is not what you want.
Dr. David Strain, I mean, there's a reason why a 12-year-old is unable to vote. There's a reason why we don't send 12-year-olds off to fight in wars. You must understand that those two things correlate with serious decisions about health, surely.
Absolutely. And nobody is suggesting that every 12-year-old is competent of making this decision. In fact, actually, from my experience, I'd say very few 12-year-olds would be making this decision. But there is the precedent in law that has been established by Lord Donaldson that says that children, if, and I stress, if they are deemed to be competent to make these decisions, to understand. So if your children doesn't understand, then you don't need to worry about this, because if they don't understand, nobody will be doing it. But if they are competent to understand the risks and benefits, then they are allowed to have their final decision to accept a treatment without parental consent. Now, the original concept of this was for children under the age of 16 to get the oral contraceptive pill. And that's now well established that this is something that if a child is competent to understand the risks and benefits, then this Gillick competence comes into play that says they can make that decision. But I want to stress that this is only if we are convinced that they are able of doing that. The vast majority of this will be consent given by the parents in their best interest. Now, actually, I've got a few concerns about that, because the main people who will get benefit from vaccinating children are actually the parents and the grandparents. We'll see a reduction in hospitalisation by 20% we'll see a reduction in mortality by 18% amongst the parents and the grandparents. As we've just heard, the actual benefit to the kids is predominantly about long COVID. 1 in 7 will miss about 3 months' worth of school. But children have no rights to say no if their parents have said yes.
OK, Dr. Anthony Hinton, do you want to come in on that?
Well, first of all, long COVID in children has been completely debunked. There are 2 excellent studies on long COVID in children from Germany and Switzerland. The only 2 studies that have a proper control group, a group of children that had COVID, proven on blood tests, and a group of children that didn't. And when you look at the symptoms from each of those groups, the symptom scores are exactly the same. Long COVID is to do with long lockdown. It's to do with what we've done to children, what governments have done to children. The fact that the UK has the worst educational record over the past 18 months of every European country apart from Italy. 48% of school children's time has not been properly in school. In Sweden, it's all been in school all the way through. And this business about saying that children will catch this at school and they're super spreaders and they will kill their parents and their granny, that is just disgraceful and should be just withdrawn. This whole argument
and it's
about
going to absolutely terrify a lot of kids who, let's be honest, have been very susceptible to this propaganda or this government messaging for a long time. So, John Jolly, aren't you worried as Chief Executive of Parentkind that actually a lot of 12-year-olds simply won't be able to make this decision and shouldn't have to make it themselves?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think this is a decision that sits with their parents. And what we know is that around 60% of parents actually would be in favour of children being vaccinated in this age category. Around 30% of parents are telling us that actually they would not want their children, they would not want children vaccinated. But what's really interesting is when you're actually talking about their children, it's pretty much a 50-50 split at the moment. And I think actually that reflects what's happening in the national debate. Shall we, shan't we? Government can't make up its mind. There's a, almighty spat going on in relation whether to do this or not. Parents will want the right to actually make that decision. And I think in most cases that should be respected. And Gillick is about individual cases and individual competence. And, and every individual child, you need to weigh up whether they're competent to make this decision or not. And I really worry that we're giving messages that, well, it's all right, parents, because if you basically don't give your consent, we'll just ask your child. And I think that's a really dangerous message for us to go down the route.
Beverly Turner, do you feel like that there's a risk, given we know what's happened with this government over many months, that you could get to a point where a vaccine passport type scheme is introduced in schools? Because we've seen this in countries like the US and certain states like New York, where where unvaccinated children are not able to, for example, partake in sports activities or go on trips or play football.
Well, I have a friend who lives in Barcelona, and both of her daughters play for Barcelona volleyball team. And she rang me up the other day crying because her 2 teenage girls had to have the vaccine and she didn't want them to, but they wanted to play sport for their town. And one of them collapsed 2 days later with severe bleeding and ovary pain. And I think that those parents who are in favour of this, you say it's 50-50, and I think probably on the whole at the moment it is, but I genuinely believe that the 50% of parents who want their child vaccinated at the moment don't have all the information. The parents don't have fully informed consent. They don't know about the risk of the vaccine. None of us can know about the risks in 5, 10, 20 years. That may not matter if you're 70. It really matters, Dan, if you're 12. If you are going to have fertility problems, neurological development problems in 10 years because of the spike proteins from the mRNA, then we need to wait. There's no rush. There's no emergency from which these children need saving. And if there was an emergency from which children needed saving, believe me, I would be the first to say, let's take the risk. All my children have had their state mandated vaccines, but I cannot see the risk. And I would just urge Dr. Strain to tell us how many healthy children died of COVID in this country last year. What makes this so necessary that you're advocating for this?
Yeah, Dr. Strange, do you want to come in on a couple of those points? Firstly, what is the risk for 12 to 15-year-olds of dying from COVID, and what is the risk of them potentially dying or picking up some other problem from the vaccine? How do the two things compare?
Yes, Beverly's absolutely right. The risk of dying for children in the UK is absolutely tiny. There have been, to my knowledge, I don't think there have been any deaths of healthy children in the UK due to COVID.
Correct.
And there's been very, very few deaths due to unhealthy COVID. What we do say, I do want to refute Dr. Hinton's comment, though. The best data on long COVID actually comes from the UK. It comes from Sir Terence Stevenson, who has got a control group of people who tested negative versus tested positive. And he demonstrated very clearly the risk of long COVID symptoms was almost twice as much as just the general lockdown fatigue that children are experiencing. We know children miss school through this. At 3 months, 1 in 7 children still had symptoms of fatigue, of headaches, of brain fog.
It's not true. Well, I can give you a counter study. I mean, if you look at the Zoe app, if you look at the King's College app, which followed more than 250,000 children between the ages of 5 to 17, only 1.8% of the 7,000 who tested positive for COVID had symptoms that lasted longer than 8 weeks. So that means that 98.2% of those children had between 5 days and 7 days of mild illness. They had a headache, they had a sore throat. It is a superb study. And just as Anthony Hinton said, it is the fact that on rebalance, it looks very much like this long COVID, which is affecting the older teens, is lockdown syndrome. They're depressed. They're being told to be ill. They're being reminded every day, you're going to be tired, you've had COVID, oh, stay in bed. And frankly, a lot of teenagers don't need an excuse to stay in bed and watch Netflix. Believe me, I've got one. So I think we have to take all of that with a pinch of salt when it comes to COVID. And it's certainly no reason to vaccinate all the kids. It's just not a good enough reason. I'm sorry.
So,
Dr. Hinton, final word.
And don't get me wrong, I agree the Zoe app is excellent, but the Zoe app was dependent on third-person reporting. So Terence Stevenson's study was actually based on direct conversations with the people who tested positive and tested
but Dr. Strain, you didn't actually answer my question, though. Dr. Strain, you didn't answer my question, though, about how does the risk from the vaccine compare to that tiny, tiny, tiny risk of contracting serious complications from COVID for a youngster?
So, I would accept that the risk, even if the Zoe app is true, is only 1 in 50. So that's only 1 in every other classroom that will be left out of school.
It's not 1 in 50.
Stevenson is right.
It's not 1 in 50.
2% is 1 in 50. If Sir Terence Stevenson is correct, then it's 1 in 7. So that's 3 people in every single classroom will be missing out on school. So, but even if it's only 1 in every other classroom that gets left out of school, but I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about the risk from the vaccine.
Yeah. That's what I'm asking about.
I can give you that. I can give you that. I don't think he's going to be able to give you that.
Okay, Beverly.
The risk from the vaccine that we know about, the main risk that people talk about is this myocarditis. After the first jab, the reports vary, but it's somewhere in the region of between 3 and 8 per million people who get that first jab. Remember, children only need the 1 jab to get 97% of their benefit.
But that's because 2 is too dangerous. Even the JCVI have said they can't dish out 2 jabs because they can't take the risk, because 2 is too dangerous. And they've said, we will give them 1 and we'll see how it goes. And I'm sorry, but even if it's small numbers of myocarditis, that's heart inflammation from which children may not necessarily recover ever. So in the absence of them being at risk from COVID, it makes no sense.
Okay, final word to you, Dr. Strain.
Every single case of myocarditis that has been reported in healthy children has got better on its own with simple paracetamol. Based on those
But we don't know the long-term
numbers,
outcome.
we will expect, based on those numbers, we will expect 37 cases of myocarditis across the whole of the UK. And
Okay.
It's not. It's more.
Myocarditis has a
37 cases per 100 million.
50% 4-year survival
With
rate.
that sort of benefit, what we are looking at is a reduction in long COVID in children.
Yep. No, I understand your point about long COVID.
We are
But
no
the
such
jury
thing.
is out on long COVID. The jury is out on long COVID, and I think there's very little
We're looking
evidence
at
that long
children- we're
COVID
looking
is
at
going to
children
impact our
missing
kids.
on
But
average.
thank you so much.
Which will-
And
We could even-
are
on
expecting
average
the JCI
less school.
decision very shortly. Thank you so much, and we will come back to